Welcome to another Instagram Live. I'm going to carry on a bit from where I was covering yesterday about what is OCD recovery and what it isn't. And the topic today is, why haven't I recovered? And that is a really important topic, okay? Because what happens is so many people are on forums, YouTube, social media, and they've been to maybe 3-4 different therapists, or they haven't been to a therapist. They've read tons of books on OCD. They've been trying for years and years, and they're asking themselves, why have I not recovered? Why am I not experiencing what the other person on social media is experiencing? Why am I still stuck? And variations of that. And that is such an important question for OCD awareness, because why are so many people with OCD still stuck? Well, I'll tell you the reason. The reason is, and similar to what I was saying yesterday, but more specific to this situation, OCD is quite resilient in a lot of cases, okay? It's a bit like a sort of bacteria that you're hitting with antibiotics and it keeps coming back, okay? So it does move around, it morphs, it adjusts, it does all those things. So why is that important to know? Because first of all, it's really important for hope. You see me often putting up #hope all the time, because the reason for that being is with OCD, it's so easy to feel hopeless. Why? Because the journey is like a roller coaster with so many hurdles and so many bumps. It's very, very easy to start feeling hopeless. Like, why am I not getting better? Why was I feeling good yesterday and feeling crap today? You know? And that part of the journey used to drive me nuts. One day I'd be feeling good. One day I'd be feeling terrible. One day I thought I'd cracked it and recovered forever. One day I thought I'd found the missing piece in my head that I was looking for, and then I wasn't going to have a problem again. And then feeling like I was chronically stuck and hadn't improved at all, or I was right back at square one. There's no such thing as square one, but it certainly feels like that when you keep going backwards and you keep getting stuck again and again. You start thinking, well, I haven't learnt much, or I can't have really interpreted this very well, or I'm not sort of making the right moves that other people are making, and we put ourselves down very, very quickly, and that's where we end up getting stuck. Okay, so that's the main reason why so many people get stuck, because of the hurdles in the journey. If you think of an athlete going along, they could have an injury and give up. They could not get on the team and give up. They could change sports and see something else which they think they're better at, and sort of miss a path that they'd obviously put a lot more work into towards that goal. So there's so many areas, and we sort of chop and change all the time along the journey. 1 minute we'll think, oh, this is really working, okay, oh, that's not, I'll quickly try this, or I'll read this book, and then this book isn't working, so I'll now read another book, and then jumping left, right, and that's what happens so much. So one of the things that I'm always telling people is, when you're approaching the recovery journey, you have got to have a plan, okay? That doesn't mean a rigid plan that's sort of bolted down and nailed down, because that's a sort of control, but you've got to have a plan. Now, in that plan, you may be looking at reading different books on OCD, which is one of the core sort of parts of a plan. What you don't want to do is go to a bookshop, buy one of the many self-help books on anxiety that's got a nice cover and it's got a nice celebrity endorsing it and saying that it helped them and so on, reading 5 pages, then picking up another, chasing instant relief, one book to the next. People come into me that have read 100 books on self-help, whereas if they'd just considered focusing on the main books, they would have done a lot better, because it's moving too much and you haven't got a proper direction. So when I put together, let's look at the reading list and then I'll go back to recovery in general. When I put our reading list together, I thought, what books did I think contained the most important principles for the recovery journey? So first of all, I wanted to cover the main theory that Albert Ellis, the founder of REBT, later into sort of CBT, but much more focusing on rational and philosophy and learning to see how things are in reality, which is incredible for OCD recovery. I thought, well, one of his great books was How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable, and I thought that really targeted OCD very well. And I thought that book is a very helpful book, and although it's a bit older now, it covers most of the main points of the theory. So I thought that's a great book to get on there. Then I wanted another book that broke down the good and bad person stuff, where we get caught in that cycle all the time, because so many people get caught in that. Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Sort of breaking down those myths completely of a good and bad person. So to do that, I looked at the book, The Myth of SelfEsteem by Albert Ellis, and I thought, right, those two Ellis books really cover the main pillars there. Okay, they're not targeted towards OCD specifically. Okay, they don't talk about bringing anxiety for the ride, changing relationship with anxiety, and all directed towards anxiety, which on my book I'm hoping does. I knew that those books had most of the principles there that then I only needed to include other books that had been so many written on anxiety, but the main principles of that included in the list too, so that there was a combination. So I brought in Claire Weekes' book, which was Self-Help for Your Nerves, which was one of the sort of the pioneering anxiety books, helping to change our relationship with anxiety, symptoms, sensations, what's going on, giving us an understanding of what's going on in anxiety, chronic anxiety and anxiety disorders and so on. So then I brought in that book. Then I thought, well, I'll bring in Paul David's book, At Last a Life, and then At Last a Life and Beyond. You can also read as well one of his other books. But I thought bring in that book because it covers in more modern day terms and in more depth in relation to anxiety disorders from somebody who'd suffered from generalized anxiety disorder for many years, all really reworded and much more detail. So I thought I'll include Paul David's book. Great addition to the reading list. So that's why I then added that. Then I put Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, because it's so helpful at getting us out of positions where we feel completely hopeless and we're never going to get better, because it really targets those principles. It really targets why there's hope, why we can get meaning out of anything, why we can, no matter how bad the suffering, no matter how difficult the situation, we can change our perspective on it. So I thought that was a key book. He'd been a Holocaust survivor, he created logotherapy, huge suicide prevention work. So I thought it was great. And I've used the tools from his book for many years, working with people in scenarios like people who'd come out of terrorist attacks to not leaving their house for 25 years and installing that hope to get them back onto their feet and moving forward, from so many of those great principles from Viktor Frankl's work, and why that's one of the best-selling books in the field of all time. Then there's Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, incredible book for sort of laying the foundations of Stoicism and Greek-Roman philosophy, the sort of main principles that CBT and REBT was built on, coming from Greek and Roman philosophy. So it shows that and helps to demonstrate that, but is, of the books on the reading list, is the least important one, but helps just give a framework and an understanding of all of that. So when you're looking at recovery and someone's saying, why am I not recovered? The reason you've got to ask yourself is what most people have learnt about anxiety and OCD usually isn't very robust. Now, let me highlight that again. What most people have learnt about OCD and anxiety usually isn't very robust. And this is something I have to keep repeating and talking to people who work with OCD sufferers all the time about, why the recovery journey and the process has to be robust. I'll tell you why. If we just approach things with, these are just OCD thoughts, these are just meaningless thoughts, these are just anxious thoughts, that doesn't do much when we're confronted with difficult life adversity, difficult life struggles. For example, if today I got cancer, hope doesn't happen, but if I did, if I just tried to observe that as a thought, as a feeling, and I just sat and tried to live in the now, that ain't going to work if I'm very, very, very scared of dying and very scared of losing control of my life. As Krishnamurti once said, fear of death is not so much, I'll get the quote completely wrong, but it's not so much about fear of dying, it's a fear of the known coming to an end. So it's the things that we know, the certainty, the clinging on to the known, the life we know, and it's the fear of going into the unknown. So it's more of fear of the known coming to an end rather than the unknown. Then what I often do is, when helping people with fear of death, for example, I use the Mark Twain quote, which again, I don't use that quote individually to help them with fear of death. I'm talking about the process of that. But it's like, we've known all the period before we were born. We've been dead for all the period before we were born. And that didn't bother us one bit. So we view death as this like impending doom that's coming. But we've been dead for all eternity before we were born as well. So it's like both sides. And that helps change the perspective of it. And with fear of death, what I'm doing is helping people philosophically break down why they're so scared of those particular things, which most humans are. Most humans' sort of general being on a day-to-day basis is putting off the idea of death to be acknowledged at another period of time, not in the present now, because most people find that hard to confront and don't want to confront it. And then they have other ideas and things they believe in to help get away from that fear of death. So fear of death is often at the core. Now, back to the point I was saying with the cancer situation. If someone has cancer, you can't tell them, oh, it's just thoughts, just leave the thoughts there, just sit with the sensation. It's going to help a bit, but if they're terrified of death, terrified of losing their life, or all the other core fears that could be attached there, fear of losing their kids, fear of losing their job, fear of losing their family, fear of not having enough money to provide for their family after they die, all these different things, anxiety consumes us, and it doesn't back down. And OCD sufferers that have got chronic OCD, they understand that. They realize that, because these life situations happen. These situations occur, and they realize it doesn't back down. I've said for many years, you can't train someone up to help somebody with OCD in a few weeks. You know, it's like you'll see centers for OCD treatment hiring tons and tons of therapists in 1 month, 2 months, and sort of putting them through a fast course. You can't do that, because I used to go to so many people to learn about, to get better from OCD, so many therapists. And in that period, I used to think, well, I know more than they do, because I've been spending years now reading this. So how's someone who's trained in 2 weeks gonna know this more than myself here? I'm not talking about their general knowledge overall in psychology. I'm talking about in relation to OCD. It's not something that you can just do that quickly. There's a lot to it. And that's the same as a lot of books. A lot of books are just repackaged versions of someone else's book. You just take a book on thoughts are thoughts, leaving thoughts there, changing a relationship with thoughts, and then that's just repackaged into 10 books with the same principles and the same, and just a little bit of variation. And the problem with that is you're not getting the depth of knowledge that's usually needed for OCD. To help somebody with OCD, they need to change a lot of their really strong irrational beliefs so that fear really comes down. That's one. They need to have an understanding of OCD to some depth and be able to change their relationship with OCD and learn to not get caught up so much in the mechanism. Then you've got to work on what their particular core fears are and break those down. Not easy to do when you're doing it on your own to yourself, because you can't always see what exactly you're doing in your thinking. So these kinds of things is why OCD is not so easy, and why it's important to highlight that, because otherwise if people think it is easy and then they're not finding it easy, they feel hopeless. Okay? So what we need to look at with the OCD journey is we need to think, right, you're not going to get recovered one day like that, bang. That doesn't happen, right? Anyone that oversimplifies it with just the thoughts are thoughts, leave thoughts there, they usually don't understand it. Not even usually, they tend to not really ever understand it, okay? That is a key principle of the recovery journey. You're not taking every thought, disputing the irrational beliefs compulsively to eradicate it. Disputing irrational beliefs is done as a gradual process. It's done bit by bit to help change your philosophies and make yourself more rational and generally calmer. When you have a thought, you're leaving all thoughts there. Humans don't walk down the street and think, oh, I've got to think this, I've got to do that, I've got to think that, I've got to think this. So that doesn't happen, okay? So I have to make those points quite clear, because otherwise those can easily get misinterpreted. So we are learning, a key part of the journey is learning to leave thoughts there, learning not to engage in thoughts, learning to have any thought, any feeling, any emotion, anything at any point of time in any experience wherever. That is key. However, what we're not doing is If it's latched and been stuck for years and not budging, and you've been leaving it there and all of that for a long time, don't just sit there doing the same again if it's not delivering a result. That's where you need to look at the core fear and break that fear down. What often happens with OCD sufferers is they go away, they think, oh, I'm good enough, and they get on with life with still chronic anxiety and chronic guilt persisting, which isn't recovery, but is part of the journey. So then we need to break that down. And so that's so key, because those things are what's gripping at the bottom. So for example, when I had the strong fear of death in relation to health OCD, until that came down, health OCD always had the upper hand, because there was so many different things that it could latch to, and it always knew that was the core fear. Now, as I brought that down through approaching death, looking at it, breaking down my core fears relating to it, all these different things, then it came down little by little by little. But initially, it would not do that. It was very much latched. It was very much gripped, because it knew that fear, that specific fear in relation to death, could override absolutely everything. Because let me take you an example. If your fear of death is so strong in relation to health OCD, and it's not coming down, what tends to happen is when you try and sit with, oh, it's just a disease, leave time to pass, whatever, that can help in a lot of situations. But then if you ever do get any developments in a health situation that feels like it's getting worse, then what happens is you then get caught in that cycle. And that's very much what happened to me, because I had a stomach problem that was genetic, that then meant that I had to go to the hospital. And when I had to go to the hospital, everything then felt like an immediate death was, the death fear was being pushed on. Because what happened was, any test or procedure that I had to have, I would be thinking, this is going to go wrong, this is dangerous, this is going to too much, this is going to be a problem. And then what happened was that was pushing me towards that fear. And that's what happens with a lot of OCD fears. What happens is we get into these positions where what it does is it finds a fear, it finds something, and then we get caught in that. So then we try and adapt all our environment very quickly to change, to make sure that we are not anywhere near that. So if it's a fear of HIV, never having sex, never going to a doctor's, never going in for tests, or if with health as well, never going to the doctors, never going to get a test, never doing any of that. So that's what happens. We can do a lot of avoidance. Whereas instead, what we want to be doing is moving towards these bit by bit and breaking down these fears bit by bit by bit by bit, which is absolutely key. Now, the fear of death, I always highlight, is an important one in lots of cases, because as we bring it down bit by bit, it helps get under the others. The same as one of the main fueling fears is fear of fear. That's one of the other main ones, because we remember how bad we were in the past. We have those memories of, I remember what it was like to be stuck. We remember that so clearly in our head. And that was one of the main things I learned from the likes of Paul David's book, where he was talking specifically about the fear sensation and trying to make us learn to be less scared, as Claire Weeks does. And that's why she was a pioneer in the 60s and 70s, because she was so, people hadn't got any information about why anxiety was, they didn't have any information really about what anxiety was and to the depth of it, and learning to see that it isn't as scary. Now we've got this sort of oversupply of information of why anxiety is just sensations, is just thoughts, is just feelings. We have too much of that now. Whereas now we need to be looking at, let's look at the core fears. Let's look at why this thing is actually scary. Let's look at why this is consuming. Let's look at why this is causing so much of a problem. Really get into that. The bottom line of this video I'm making today is this. If you're still stuck, you know, you're very aware that you're still stuck, okay? We know if we're still stuck, okay? And we can feel it. We can see, hey, I've got chronic guilt. Hey, I've got chronic anxiety. I can really feel that and really experience that. That is there. So if you're going and you've been trying that book over and over and over and over of leaving thoughts there, leaving sensations there, leaving feelings there, and it isn't working, you need to think about that, because in the OCD community, that is drilled home like it's a sort of mantra of thoughts are just thoughts are meaningless thoughts. And people are often saying that to themselves 50 times a day. Thoughts are just thoughts are meaningless thoughts. It's just OCD. It's just OCD is one of the biggest mantras. It's one of the biggest problems in the OCD community of where people are being taught to say that over and over. And it's giving them a little drip of reassurance, you know? And that's so important. Like with everything that I do is really trying to make life structure changes, showing people that they need to make robust changes for recovery, that they need to learn to reduce fears, that they need to learn to have a good life structure. All these main principles that is exactly the reason why I approach everything I do from a life coaching direction, because it's so much about that. It's about acting in the now. I want to really focus on how we're making change in the now to life structure, anxiety skills for dealing with our fears. This needs to be shared amongst all humans. This isn't skills just for OCD. This is skills for life. This should be taught in the schooling system. Then people wouldn't get themselves into terrible situations. Some guy might work in the city, he might be a stockbroker, and he suddenly, all his life, he's wanting to make a lot of money and support his family. And suddenly he loses his job. Bang. Suddenly in that moment, that guy has got no tools and he might jump out the window because he doesn't know anything about rational thinking. So these life skills are key. I'm working with OCD because OCD is what I have, it's what I've recovered from, and is something that needs huge work done. So I'm working a lot on the OCD situation. My goal is to be doing a lot more broader anxiety and life coaching in general, which I still do a lot of, but I'm going to be branching out into doing a lot more of. But OCD is definitely the thing where I saw it's just that rigidity, that sort of instant fight to get rid of anxiety, that instant fight to get rid of something scary, that sort of instant internal reflex to push away. Okay? And that's a large part of it, as well as, obviously, the philosophy about our lives. That's how we're living, that's how we're viewing, that's how we're seeing things and experiencing things. We need to change that, because if we're still scared of all these different things in our life, no matter how comfortable we are with these thoughts, we're going to be too scared of too much, and that's going to cause a problem. So we need to learn to bring that down. And that is so key. So I think what you really want to be thinking about is you want to be thinking, the recovery journey is a sort of skills for life. It's an empowering journey. It's not a thing where you're just trying to get to OCD recovery, get to anxiety recovery and move on. If you look at anyone's journeys, athletes, different celebrities that have achieved huge things, and you look at things and they'll say, I had this really difficult moment in my life where such and such happened, and overcoming that changed my life. That's key. Those kind of principles, saw a lot of those in a lot of people's work today that's very common. The likes of Tony Robbins, you see him talking about those things. The likes of Gary Vaynerchuk, you see him talking about a lot of those things in terms of changing and adapting in our life to use those difficulties and that struggle to be the thing that empowers us. The bricks we get, the bricks that were, as to two different quotes. There's one that says, like, the bricks that were thrown against you, use them to be the building blocks, which I think is a great one. And then just looking at that struggle, looking at what can you turn this around to do? Like, so much people excuses, and this is terrible, and this is never going to get better, and I've got a reason why I can't, I've got a reason, hundreds and hundreds of excuses. But what about the one reason you can? What about the one reason you can make that change and become this completely empowered version of the you before, that's completely seen things differently and is completely going for it and adapting and changing? That's where you've got to go. We're all going to have hurdles. We're all going to have problems. We're all going to have things that other people didn't have, other difficulties, other struggles. But what are you going to do to make those things work for you? Now, that's not just some sort of TikTok scroll down thousands of life coach-like speeches that barely cover any content and robustness. There's a million of them. It's looking at the real principles, breaking down those fears with the theory, really bringing those down, looking at the things, the goals, looking at what you want, looking at why you can get that, why you can achieve that, breaking down what those fears are, using philosophy that stood the test of time of thousands of years. Doing that step by step, bit by bit, is what makes the adjustments and puts things into the process. You're not just going to be able to make yourself just think, oh, I'll just do that or I'll change. It's the same as you wouldn't see somebody recovering from OCD just by sort of wishful thinking, positive thinking. That doesn't occur. That's a complete myth. Where people think, oh, just sort of think positively or snap yourself out of it or really just go for it. You can't just really go for it. You've got to show the brain that there's nothing to be scared of, or you've got to show the brain that you've got a different relationship with OCD. But you can't just do the second part alone often. You will need to do the first part. So that's really important, to just build that up, to build up that platform that's going to give you the building blocks there for moving forward. And a lot of what I'm doing is speaking about hope and motivation, because that can be the biggest hurdle initially. Without that, I mean, you can do things not motivated, of course, one day at a time, building things up bit by bit. But at the same time, what you really need to be thinking about is, how do I get myself really going for this? What great things can I get from this? How can I view this as some kind of almost like a gift, something that's going to really empower my life, that if I hadn't experienced OCD, I would have never got into that position, because that's key. I've heard people working with people with cancer who've told me cancer was a gift, and it used to blow my mind. I think, how could they think that? But they said it changed their whole perception of their reality and their life just by experiencing that and seeing that and changing their perspective. Now, that doesn't mean for a second they don't want to get rid of their cancer. They absolutely do. But they've changed their perception of what that is, from the thing that felt the scariest thing, the thing that they felt was breaking them, to the thing that was going to empower them and change their life. So that's key. We've got to think of it like that. We've got to go for it like that. We've got to really use what we've got in front of us and do that. And that was basically my message of the video today. And that is all around that hashtag hope through the recovery process, carrying on from yesterday's video. If you haven't seen it on the YouTube channel, please watch it. And if you watch any of our videos and you find any of the content helpful, please tell other OCD sufferers about it and share the stuff with them. You know, we put out loads of free content on all the different channels so that people in whatever country can get help, the help that they can. We've got all our videos, most of our videos being translated in all different languages, so people can access it all over the world. It's obviously free content, so you can access that, but we do provide all one-to-one coaching, group coaching, webinars, OCD courses, and so on, which if you're interested in, email at me or my team at info@ocdrecovery.com. And if you liked this video, please smash up the like button on the YouTube videos, because that really helps us, because it helps us get noticed, helps our stuff get seen, and subscribe to the channels or any of our pages, because it really helps us spread this message for OCD awareness of what works and what doesn't, and showing the evidence of why it works and helping others to see that. Guys, great to see you all on here. I'll be back on very soon doing a question and answers video. I will see you on the next one. Take it easy, guys.